Hi there, I'm Chuck Rosansky and I own the Pueblo Treasures Museum. And this is installment number 4 of a series that I'm doing about Pueblo pottery and the Pueblo Treasures Museum in particular. But it's not what you think, because I could go around my Pueblo Treasures Museum all day long and show you how mine is bigger and better and has more cool stuff, and that makes me a wonderful mensch because, oh my God, I have such great pottery. I don't know how many times I've heard that from other people, and it really sort of makes my head spin. That's not what my videos are about. My videos are intended, if you'll pardon the expression, to educate you. Okay, I'm trying in some ways to give you a sense of how and why Pueblo pottery is important, why you should collect it, and if you already collect it, maybe give you a little bit of insight as to how, at least I think, and in some measure, how some of the Pueblo people think. And so I wanted to start off here with a friend of mine's pottery today. All of this pottery that's in this particular row, there's over 1,000 pieces of pottery from Cochiti, Pueblo. Now, Cochiti, Pueblo is a Quiros Pueblo that's a little bit south of Santa Fe. It's basically the first Pueblo you run into along the Rio Grande on your way to Albuquerque. So, at Cochiti, Pueblo, they have a tradition of figural pottery. And my friend Chris here, who's kind enough to be filming for me today, I'm gonna have Chris just do a quick little sort of scan of some of the figural pottery that I have here from Cochiti. I like it a lot. For my day job, I'm a comic book dealer. And so these kinds of anthropomorphic pieces are right up my alley. I like fantasy and I like things that are whimsical. All these Cochiti pieces kind of fit in that category. And so I want to enter into today's discussion by showing you this really cool Cheshire cat that was done by my friend Martha Caro. Now, Martha Caro was around when Methuselah was running around. She's about 90 these days, or thereabouts. Don't hit me, Martha. But she's still turning out really great potteries. Now, I have a lot of these Cheshire cats, and I have them here when visitors come to the Pueblo Treasures Museum. I try to show them these cats because I particularly, Chris, show everyone their faces because these are the same cat, at least in terms of its intent, but every one of them has its own personality and its own idiosyncrasies. Well, the reason why that's important is because there are some folks that get into Pueblo pottery collecting, and I was one of those. Way back in the beginning, back in the late 1990s, when I was going to auctions up in Longmont, Colorado, it was with the thought that, hey, these might be a good investment. This might be something that I could put together a collection of, and then people would think that, you know, I was all cool. Things have evolved since then. They've evolved a lot, and I can go into depth. If you come here and visit my Pueblo Treasures Museum, it is available for viewing, but you got to make an appointment with me. Go back to my video number 1. It's got all the details on how you can set up an appointment. But long story short, I set this up because I wanted to show that the big difference between Pueblo pottery and pottery that you buy almost anywhere else is that everything that is sold at the Pueblos is hand built. And when it's hand built, there's a spirituality that's involved. Even on pieces like these, where they're being, you almost want to use the expression mass produced, but they're not. These were probably created at least a year apart. So this is a decade of Martha Caro's effort, and I just happen to have been blessed to have these come to me. Now, this is a very strange concept. Okay, notice that I didn't say I was lucky enough to locate these. I said they came to me. This is a concept that's a little hard for people who are unfamiliar with Pueblo pottery to kind of get their heads around. But take it for a second, and I will explain to you why, in some regards, my museum here is actually a really large orphanage. And that is because a lot of the Pueblo creators, and I'm not putting this on Martha, I'm just saying a lot of the Pueblo creators with whom I've spoken, because they harvest the clay most often on their Pueblos, they believe it's a gift from Mother Earth that allows them to sustain themselves. And when they receive that gift, it is beholden upon them to say the right prayers as they're creating the pottery, and more importantly, as they're firing it. Some Pueblo creators in recent years have started adopting electric kilns, which takes some of the risk out of firing pottery in order to harden it. But a lot of Pueblo creators still fire in the traditional way, which is to basically they take something like a steel grate and they'll lay it on the ground, and then they'll pile the pottery on it, and they'll put big piles of either cottonwood or pine around that, and then they'll just set it on fire. And if they want to, at the end of the process, have it turn black in a reduction firing, then they smother that fire toward the end of the firing with horse manure or ground sheep manure or something like that. And so the amount of risk that's involved, the odds that something will break in the firing are extremely high. They also fire at relatively low temperatures. When you're firing in a backyard, you're just not going to get the kind of temperature that you would get in a ceramics kiln. And so that's why a few of the more modern potters, especially the ones that are doing the kind of artsy-fartsy pottery that you see in the very expensive galleries in Santa Fe, that type of pottery, you just don't want to risk it. You don't want to put that pottery out in your backyard and light a bunch of sticks around it. There's too much work. I mean, a lot of times people will produce one piece and they need to get $10,000 or $20,000 out of it because that's their livelihood. That's how they live. But your more traditional potters are going to be turning out pottery in very small quantities, and they're going to be praying over that pottery. And the theory is that only if their spirits are in the right place and only if they say the right prayers will that pottery survive the firing in their backyard and then be able to be something that they can sell. But there's another part of this, and that is that when they're processing the clay in and of itself is not all that abrasive, but to form clay, you have to put something into the clay to make it harden. And so they have to put what's called a temper in the clay. Now, some potters use old broken pieces of pottery that they grind up in order to get granules. And those granules will help bond the clay together. But for other pueblos, like at Cochiti, they use river sand. And at Zia, they actually take volcanic rock and grind it up. And so they use a black volcanic basalt as their temper. But there has to be something that holds what's called the paste, just the clean clay, to where it'll harden. And so when they do that, when they're working with clay that has abrasives in it, little bits of their skin, and sometimes even blood, will go into their individual pieces. This is not something that you get when you're going to Hallmark, okay? If you go to Hallmark and you're trying to buy some sort of figurine, or if you're buying something from Franklin Mint or whatever, those are collectibles. They're produced in mass, oftentimes from a mold. These are not. These are hand-built. These are built with bits of the Creator actually infused within the clay, and with the prayers of the Creator as to their survival. And so This is why, and you can read this in the literature, a lot of Pueblo creators consider their potteries to actually be their offspring. There is a spiritual connection between these potteries and the person who made them. And this is why I try as much as I can here in the Pueblo Treasures Museum to attribute pottery to the person who made it. I'm, of course, way behind on making my little labels, but I got one for Martha here. You know, I really should get my butt in gear and do more, but I have 15,000 pieces and it takes a lot of time, okay? But now, let's move on to a different thing, and I'm gonna try and get your head a little twisted here, okay? And this on purpose, okay? First thing is that when you're looking at pottery like this, it's very easy to say, I found this. I found it in an auction. I found it in an antique store. I found it, blah, 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 blah. Santa Fe Indian Market. But wait a minute. This presumes that the pottery is inanimate and that pottery has no agency. Now think about that for a second. Agency implies will and implies the ability to influence events. I have come to believe over the 3 decades that I've been blessed to have Pueblo pottery come into my life, that Pueblo pottery has an ability to influence who purchases it. I participate in auction after auction after auction in any given week. That's how all this stuff gets here. I mean, I look a lot, and I do it on a shoestring because I pay for everything myself. I have no outside funding whatsoever. And so there's a certain degree of serendipity as to what ends up coming to the museum and what doesn't. There are a lot of times when there are pieces that I think, well, I got to have that. And then it just blows up and it goes way more than I could ever afford. And then there are other times when I see pieces where I say, oh my God, I could never afford that. And I put in a minimum bid and no one else bids, and that piece ends up here. After a while, after you've done this, like I said, 15,000 times, well, 15,000 times means I participated easily in 100,000 auctions because I lose a lot. And so the randomness of chance, the randomness of serendipity, you start to wonder after a while, is there a degree of agency within the pieces that dictates what will come here to live with me for the rest of my life? What is it that compels certain pieces of pottery to be here with me? And it's hard to explain, but the Pueblo people will tell you that one of the things that you need to do, and we'll go around the corner here because this is another area where I'm behind, but I'm working on it. And that is that when you're looking at pieces, particularly the older pieces, the pieces, some of them are like a lot, all of these, at least on the lower shelves, all of these are pre-1492, so pre-contact. And I put a little bit of time every day into filling these little bowls. Now this bowl, by any stretch of the imagination, this is an old Salado bowl from the Salado culture. It was collected by a museum at some point. It's got a little museum collection number on the bottom of it, which identifies the site where it was found. But they discarded it because that's what museums and archaeologists do whenever they have anything that they feel isn't going to make them money. I find that a bit disturbing myself, okay? But that's a subject for a different day. But if you'll notice, on the inside of this little bowl, I've converted it into a blessing bowl. So this holds white cornmeal. Here's my 20-pound bag, or no, this was a 5-pound bag. 5-pound bag of white cornmeal. that I drove all the way to Zuni, Pueblo to pick this up. And it's very important that you infuse the cornmeal with your breath. And then the cornmeal itself feeds your pots. And I try to regularly feed my pots and regularly talk to my pots. And that may sound weird, okay? But it is accepted practice among many of the Pueblo people. And you can never speak as a unified entity because everybody has different ways of viewing the world. But there's a general feeling that these pots are still alive and they still carry some of the essence of their creators. And so when I'm looking at, some of these White Mountain redwares like this Cedar Creek polychrome right here, this was made probably around 1300, 1350. That's 600 years ago. And I can run my fingers on the inside of the rim and I can still feel the finger impressions of the person who made it 600 years later. This bowl was one that should never have come to me. It was too expensive. I couldn't afford it. And yet, here it is. Somehow, some way, it came across time and space. And let's just think about that for a second. When I talk about time and space, first of all, I talk about time because it's 600 years. This bowl was at one time broken. It's been professionally restored, okay? But those pieces were reassembled so that this bowl could come here to the Pueblo Treasures Museum and be a part of this greater family of thousands of pieces that are here, that are all being fed and treated with respect. Now, there's people out there who say none of this should be out of the ground, all of this should be buried, all of this should be gone. Yeah, okay. I am totally of the belief that the world has room for a multitude of opinions. But of the pieces that have disappeared, of the pieces that have been put back in the ground, these did not. These came to me. And I don't know why I was chosen, and I don't know why I have this obligation. I mean, this keeps me totally broke every minute of every day. I could have done so many other things, but somehow I was compelled into this calling, and I have all of these pieces here. But the epiphany hit me one day that this is the world's largest orphanage of Pueblo pottery. And so I am their guardian, and it's my job to protect them and to do my best to honor the thousands of creators who over the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years put these pieces together so that they could somehow, through serendipity, end up here. Now, let's flip this around for a second. And this is really the point where I was trying to get to. There's different kinds of people that are involved in Pueblo pottery. There are people who I call the catalyst people. They're the dealers out there. They're the ones who find the old pieces, whether it be in an estate or whatever, and then they act as a transactionalist and they get those pieces into the hands of new people. Then there are the people who are the investors. And I run into them fairly frequently. And the first thing they want to know is, well, gee, what would that sell for? What could I buy it for? And it's a very mercantile kind of approach. My assumption, if you're watching this, is that you fall either into one of those two categories, or I think actually the vast majority of people fall into the category of really just appreciating the aesthetics and loving the beauty of Pueblo pottery. Well, that's a really good approach, but I would just suggest that maybe you try and get your head around the fact that you are now after having purchased your pottery, you are now the guardian of that pottery. And it is beholden upon you to protect it and to also maybe at some point feed it some cornmeal. The white cornmeal is the best, but any cornmeal is better than no cornmeal. And I talk to my pottery. I talk to my pottery all the time. If that's too woo-woo for you, fine. Go there, be there. I don't care, okay? But I'm just telling you how the Pueblo Treasures Museum came to be. I did not, of volition, say, I'm going to go out there and try to buy up all the pottery in the world. That was not my goal. That was never my intent. I kind of got sucked into a vortex. And so here I am, and, you know, I have just everywhere I turn, incredibly rare and beautiful artifacts that are sometimes insanely old. Sometimes they're like Martha Carroll's, where they were made last week, okay? Some of them are old. But the bottom line is that I don't view myself as owning them. I viewed their arrival here as a responsibility and something that I need to take seriously and recognize that there is some, and I'm not saying it's total, I'm just saying that there is some truth to the fact that Pueblo pottery has agency. So the next time that you walk past your shelf and you're looking at those pots on the shelf, think for a minute if they're looking back at you. Because in my belief system, they are. This is Chuck Rosansky from Pueblo Treasures. Thank you so much for sharing the video with me. This is such a wonderful world. We are so blessed. The Pueblo people have been so kind to us. Let's all celebrate it and have a good time. Thanks.